At the very end of comedy, there is tragedy. That is true with Anchorman. 22 years ago, this movie was one of the wildest happy crazes in American comedy. But looking back now, the thing that makes me stop is not how funny this movie was. It is that the real lives of this cast later turned out to be more tragic than I ever thought. One went through cancer and then multiple sclerosis. One got tangled up with alcohol, legal trouble, and a broken family. One carried a youth full of addiction, violence, and loss. Today, you and I are going to look back at the cast of Anchorman after 22 years, not just to see how they changed, but to see what life did to them. And if you stay till the end, I have 5 really wild, behind-the-scenes stories about this movie. 2 little things, but enough to show you why Anchorman is still the kind of movie nobody can remake. Number 1. Christina Applegate as Veronica Corningstone. Let's start with the woman a whole lot of men who watched Anchorman have never forgotten. Not just because Christina Applegate was beautiful. Hollywood has never been short on beautiful women. What puts her at the top of this list is something completely different. Anchorman would not have worked nearly as well if they had not picked exactly the right Christina Applegate for Veronica Corningstone, the woman strong enough to flip Ron Burgundy's male-dominated world upside down. Christina was born in 1971. When the movie came out in 2004, she was 33. And to be fair, she was not some new face they brought in just to fill out the lineup. She was already famous from Married with Children, already had an Emmy from Friends, which means she walked into this movie with the standing of a real television star. But the bitter part is that even someone like Christina Applegate was still looked down on by Hollywood. In March 2026, she said the first salary offer she got for Anchorman was so low it felt insulting and she turned it down. In the end, Will Ferrell and Adam McKay themselves had to take less so her pay could be raised. That detail alone says plenty about that era. A woman with a real name holding the most important female role in the movie still had to fight just to get paid decently. After the movie, Christina did not disappear. She kept going with Samantha Who and then Dead to Me. And Dead to Me alone brought her Emmy nominations in all 3 seasons. So Veronica was not her one bright flash. She really had the talent, and she held on to that weight for a long time. Then, life started getting rougher. In 2008, she faced breast cancer. In 2021, she made her multiple sclerosis diagnosis public. Then, by 2026, she also revealed the pain she had kept hidden all those years, a childhood full of hurt, abusive relationships, memories of assault, and a body that no longer listens to her the way it once did. That is the part that makes me see Christina Applegate as more than just a woman I once had a crush on in a comedy. She became a woman I genuinely admire. This year she is 55. She worries she is no longer in the phase of living on lights or looks. She lives on endurance, honesty, and a kind of dignity that is very hard to find in Hollywood. And from the woman who helped hold the whole movie upright, now we get to the man who turned it into a legend. Number 2, Will Ferrell as Ron Burgundy. Now we get to the man who turned the whole movie into a legend. For a whole lot of male viewers from my generation, Ron Burgundy is not just a comedy character, he is a joke aimed at an entire era, when men on television believed they were born to sit at the center of the news desk. Ferrell himself later said he is still very proud that Anchorman is alive and well in pop culture after 20 years. Will Ferrell was born in 1967. When the movie came out in 2004, he was 37. At that point, Ferrell had already left Saturday Night Live, had just gotten a major push from Old School and especially Elf. So Anchorman landed at exactly the moment he was shifting from sketch comedy star to a real movie presence. Ron Burgundy did not create Will Ferrell from scratch, but it locked in his movie identity in a way very few comedy roles ever do. What matters even more is that Ron Burgundy was not invented out of nowhere. Ferrell said the inspiration came from a documentary about Jessica Savage and the television world full of gender bias in the 1970s. In it, there was Anchorman Mort Krim, whose Old School on-air voice stayed so perfectly intact that Ferrell found it both funny and perfect for building Ron Burgundy. That is why the role sounds ridiculous but never empty. It has real roots. In real life, Ferrell is not the kind of star with a scandal-filled private life. His biggest break happened somewhere else, and to me, it is a lot sadder the falling out with Adam McKay, the man who built an entire golden era of American comedy with him. McKay said the breakup felt like a breakup after the two of them ended Gary Sanchez and their relationship cracked over work decisions. Some friendships create great movies, and some fractures leave people sadder than any scandal ever could. In 2018, Ferrell also went through a car accident that sent him to the hospital, though thankfully it did not lead to long-term consequences. This year, Ferrell is 59. He is still a major name, still the kind of guy who could step into Ron Burgundy at any moment and have audiences recognize him instantly. Not every comedy actor gets to keep that, and after the most arrogant news anchor in San Diego, now we get to the reporter audiences probably remember for a very different reason. Number 3, Paul Rudd as Brian Fantana. Brian Fantana is basically just the slick
Let's go see if we can make this little kitty
Channel 14. In somebody else's hands, this could have easily been just a funny, supporting role that came and went. But Paul Rudd turned it into a classic. When Anchorman came out in 2004, he was 35, had already done Clueless, had already been familiar to television audiences through friends, but still was not yet the kind of movie star who could dominate the box office. Movies like Anchorman are what pushed him onto the comedy track he later rode a very long way. What I find interesting is that off-screen, Paul Rudd is almost the complete opposite of Brian Fantana. In real life, Rudd is so private, there is basically no real scandal for tabloids to cling to. The real hard parts of his life were a lot quieter than that. As a kid, he was bullied, and he admitted he used humor as a shield to protect himself. That is the kind of reflex a whole lot of men understand very well, just not everybody says it out loud. Then, as an adult, the thing he had to wrestle with was not scandal, but insecurity. People look at Paul Rudd and usually think they have him figured out, too fast, bright face, likable, safe. But even after becoming successful, he still talked about self-doubt. The biggest blow came in 2008 when his father died of cancer. He called that a very difficult time, not just because of the loss, but because the whole family was under a lot of pressure at once. He is not a man with no scars. He is just the kind who carries them very quietly. After all that, he kept moving forward in a very steady way. He has kept his marriage to Julie Yeager since 2003, has 2 children, and always says he thinks of himself first as a husband and a father. He also spent years supporting SAY, the organization that helps children who stutter and turn that empathy into real work instead of just pretty words. This year, Paul Rudd is 57. People keep talking about how he does not seem to age, but I think what is way more impressive is that he has held on to kindness, calm, and decency in a Hollywood full of temptation. Number 4, David Koechner as Champ Kind. Champ Kind is the kind of character who does not need much screen time to be remembered. White cowboy hat, swaggering voice energy like he is about to pick a fight with the whole world. When Anchorman came out in 2004, David Koechner was 42, and this was the biggest film role of his career up to that point. Before that, he had already come through Chicago Improv Second City, 1 short season on Saturday Night Live, then sketch work for Conan. But Champ Kind was the role that really made the public remember David Koechner's name, not just his face. The sad part is that his real-life story turned out way darker than the laughter on screen. His marriage to Lee Koechner lasted 22 years and brought 5 children, but it started publicly falling apart in 2020. Lee herself wrote that she had struggled for years trying to save that marriage to the point of losing sleep, being unable to eat, and finally having to ask David to move out. That was the first crack, and looking back now, it feels like the opening of a very hard fall. Then things shifted from sad to genuinely alarming. On New Year's Eve at the end of 2021, Koechner was arrested in Simi Valley after allegedly running a stop sign, crashing into a median, and leaving the scene. Police said his blood alcohol level was around 1.5 times the legal limit. Just a few days later, his estranged wife went to court asking to temporarily stop child visitation and request monitoring measures to make sure he stayed sober. And that fall did not stop with one time. In June 2022, he was arrested again in Ohio on suspicion of driving while impaired, which made it the second time in just 5 months. By 2025, Koechner started speaking more openly about years of struggling with alcohol, about a close friend who died from fentanyl, about the DUI that ended up on TMZ, and about how he was then coming up on almost 2 years sober. This year, he is 64. Number 5, Steve Carell as Brick Tamland. When the movie came out in 2004, Steve Carell was 42. This year, Steve Carell is 64. Back then, he was not yet a giant movie star. He had already come through Second City, The Dana Carvey Show, The Daily Show, and had even worked as a mail carrier before finding solid footing in comedy. In other words, Brick Tamland was not the starting point of Steve Carell's career, but it was the first movie role that made a whole lot of audiences really remember his name. Just 1 year after Anchorman, Carell stepped right into the biggest explosion of his career with The Office and The 40-Year-Old Virgin. Looking back now, Brick Tamland really was the first knock on the door before all of Hollywood threw it wide open for him. Compared to some of the others on this list, Steve Carell has had a much quieter private life. No chain of scandals, no public crashes, none of the chaos tabloids love to hunt down. What is impressive about him is the long road. He came up slowly, built for years, then stayed grounded even after becoming famous. He has been married to Nancy Carell since 1995, has 2 children, and even now still says the most important part of his life is not the spotlight, but his family. Number 6, Fred Willard as Ed Harken. When Anchorman came out in 2004, Fred Willard was already 71. At that age, he was not stepping into the movie to rediscover fame. He had already been a seasoned face in American comedy for a very long time, but to be fair, the thing that makes people look at Fred Willard the longest now is not that role anymore. It is the final stretch of his life. In 2012, when he was already past 70, Fred Willard got caught up in a very sensitive incident at an adult movie theater in Hollywood. He called it deeply embarrassing and very painful, but still insisted he had done nothing wrong. Even though he was never charged, that stumble was still big enough to dent the image of a man who had spent a whole lifetime building a reputation on charm and harmlessness. At that age, one night was enough to cast a shadow over a whole career. The bitter part is that the fallout came almost immediately. PBS removed him from Market Warriors because they did not want the incident becoming a distraction for the show. For a young actor, that would already have been a heavy blow. For a man on the far side of life's slope, it was a whole lot heavier. It was not just about losing a job. It was the feeling of being pulled away from a place he had protected for decades at the age when his name should have been allowed to grow old in peace. But the sadder part came later. In 2018, Mary Willard, the wife who had been with him for more than 50 years, died at 71. Fred Willard kept working, still earned recognition with Emmy nominations, but his private life by then must have been completely changed. Fred Willard died on May 15th, 2020, at 86. What makes me sad for him is not just that a great comedy artist was gone. What makes me sad is that the final chapter of a man who made generations of audiences laugh went through too much shame, too much loss, and too much loneliness. Number 7. Fred Armisen as Tino. Fred Armisen only passes through Anchorman as Tino, the restaurant owner, where Ron takes Veronica on a date. When the movie came out in 2004, he was 38, right in the middle of his Saturday Night Live run, which means he was not a newcomer, but not yet a major movie name either. For a lot of people, Tino is just a fun little cameo. But honestly, this is one of the names on this list that surprised me the most. Fast divorces in Hollywood are nothing unusual. People get together and split up, and we hear it so much we almost stop feeling anything. But Fred Armisen's case with Elizabeth Moss was different. They got married in 2009, then that marriage pretty much fell apart after only about 8 months, and the divorce was finalized in 2011. That speed alone is enough to make you stop. But the part that is really hard to swallow is the way Moss talked about it later. She described it as an extremely awful and deeply traumatic experience. Once you hear that, it stops sounding like just another normal breakup. What shocked me even more is that Fred Armisen never really dodged his own responsibility in it. He openly said he had been a terrible husband and a terrible boyfriend. Then he spoke very plainly about his own pattern getting interested very fast, getting bored just as fast, then moving on to somebody else. To me, that is the part of this story that really feels cold, not some scandal that blew up and died out. More like the feeling that he understood his own problem very clearly. It is just that it had already caused too much wreckage. This year, Fred Armisen is 60. He is still working, still a very distinct comedy presence, and now has a much more private marriage with Riki Lindholm. Number 8, Vince Vaughn as Wes Mantooth. When the movie came out in 2004, Vaughn was 34. This year he is 56. Back then he was not some guy still waiting for his break. Swingers had already brought him into the light old school, had already put him on the right comedy track in America, and Anchorman and Dodgeball only made that image even more famous. In real life, Vince Vaughn does not have the kind of long, lingering tragedies some of the other names on this list do. But he did have one very public and very serious stumble. In 2018, Vaughn was arrested in Manhattan Beach on suspicion of drunk driving and resisting officers after a checkpoint stop. By 2019, he entered a no-contest plea and was sentenced on a reckless driving count with 3 years of unsupervised probation and a required 3-month alcohol program. For somebody that famous, that was no longer just bad luck on one random night. It was a real scratch on his public image, the kind of fall that makes people stop and look at him a little differently. What matters is that Vaughn did not keep sliding after that. He did not disappear, but he definitely lost some of the noise he used to carry. He has kept his marriage to Kyla Weber, has 2 children, and at his Hollywood Walk of Fame star ceremony in 2024, he said very clearly that his wife and kids are the most important part of his life. Number 9, Chris Parnell as Garth Holliday. Chris Parnell came into Anchorman as Garth Holliday. When the movie came out in 2004, he was 37, already one of the Saturday Night Live people, but still the kind of actor whose value was understood more by people in the business than by mainstream audiences. This year, Chris Parnell is 59. After studying acting, he went to Alley Theater as an apprentice and was not kept on. At one point, he got so discouraged he went back to Memphis and taught school for 1 year. Then he headed to Los Angeles, worked at FAO Schwartz for 5 years, and quietly studied with the Groundlings. That is not the path of a man life laid out neatly for. That is the path of a man who had to stay stubborn and hold on to the craft. Then came Saturday Night Live, where his story is both admirable and bitter. In 2001, he was fired the first time, and he himself said it was a huge shock, and that even now, he never fully understood why. He got called back then. In 2006, he was let go a second time. He kept going in a way that was very much his own. Not by winning with one giant breakout, but by winning through staying power. 30 Rock Archer, Rick and Morty, and a long list of voice roles turned him into one of the most familiar voices in modern American comedy. Number 10, Ben Stiller as Arturo Mendez. Ben Stiller only shows up for a flash in Anchorman as Arturo Mendez. But it is exactly the kind of cameo you remember the second you see it. When the movie came out in 2004, he was 39, and by then he was already a major name in American comedy. Reality bites. There's something about Mary, Meet the Parents. Zoolander. Ben Stiller did not walk into this movie to grab a little extra spotlight. He came in as a star who was already standing on solid ground, then left behind a tiny mark that was still hard to forget in that crazy battle scene. But if you really look at Ben Stiller's life, the thing that stays with you a lot longer is not Arturo Mendez's mustache. It is a pretty heavy run of personal blows. In 2014, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer at 48. He said very openly that he was scared and that it all came completely out of nowhere. Luckily, it was found early enough for treatment, and just a few months later, he got the news that he was cancer-free. Then, in 2017, his marriage to Christine Taylor fell apart after 17 years. Around that same period, he was also carrying the aftershock of Zoolander 2 failing something he himself called a very painful experience. Then came one family loss. After another, his mother died in 2015, and his father died in 2020. To me, those are the years that really changed Ben Stiller the most. In the end, he and Christine got back together in 2022, and more recently, both of them have said pretty plainly that they came back to each other in a more mature way. Number 11, Luke Wilson as Frank Vitchard. Maybe the most memorable thing about Luke Wilson is not Anchorman at first. It is talking about a night in 2018 when he got caught up in a deadly car crash in Pacific Palisades. Luke was not the one who caused the accident, and he was not hurt either. But his car was hit, and then he ran out to help pull a woman trapped inside an overturned SUV. Another man was killed in the crash. Back to Anchorman. Luke came into the movie as Frank Vitchard when he was just 33. This year, Luke Wilson is 55. It is not a big role, but it is very memorable in the battle between the news teams. At that point, he was not a new face anymore. Luke already had Bottle Rocket Rushmore Legally Blonde and Old School, so he already had a place on screen as a very specific kind of American man. But if we are talking about the hardest part of Luke Wilson's life to swallow, I think we should also mention the 2015 case. He sued his former assistant over allegations of unauthorized credit card use, taking personal property, and identity theft. Later, the court awarded Luke a default judgment of more than $437,000. Things like that are not loud, the way drunken arrests are, but they sting in a different way. Being used by somebody close to you always leaves a more bitter taste than people on the outside realize. Then in 2021, Luke said he had started feeling uneasy about hitting 50. Number 12, Jack Black as Motorcyclist. If there is anybody on this list whose real life feels even more intense than the role, it is Jack Black. In Anchorman, he only shows up very briefly as the biker who loses it after Ron Burgundy's burrito hits him, then kicks Baxter off the bridge. When the movie came out in 2004, Jack Black was 35 and he was already a major name. This year he is 56. High Fidelity had already brought him into the spotlight. School of Rock turned him into a star, and Tenacious D made Jack Black's image feel like it always carried this half-funny, half-crazy energy that was impossible to confuse with anybody else. But the part that stays with me longer is not the laughter. It is the very messy stretch of life he came through. His parents divorced when he was 10, and he said the breakup hit him deeply. By 14, he was already using cocaine, hanging around very dangerous people, and at times afraid to go to school because he felt like he could be killed. Then came the hardest blow. His brother Howard died of AIDS in 1989 when he was only 31. Jack Black said Howard had a huge impact on him, was the one who took him to his first rock concert, and was a major part of his musical taste and the emotional world of his youth. Losing somebody like that while both of you are still so young is the kind of thing that never fully leaves. And to be fair, a lot of the intensity in Jack Black probably started in years like those. Later on, he rebuilt his life in a pretty solid way. He married Tanya Hayden. In 2006, has 2 children. And in early 2026, they celebrated 20 years of marriage. But even with a stable family life, the turbulence never disappeared completely. In 2024, Tenacious D had to cancel a tour after Kyle Gass made remarks about the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, and Jack Black said he had been completely blindsided and put the group's creative plans on hold. Number 13, Danny Trejo as Bartender. If I had to pick one person to close out this cast section, I would pick Danny Trejo. Not because his role in Anchorman is big. Really, it is very short, just a bartender passing through. But some people move through a movie like a small detail, while in real life they carry a whole life so huge the screen could never hold all of it. Danny Trejo is that kind of person. When Anchorman came out in 2004, he was 60. This year he is 82, and just the fact that he is still standing there is already a story by itself. The heaviest part of Danny Trejo's story comes from the years before he became an actor. He grew up around, violence, got into drugs very early, then became addicted to heroin while still very young. After that came more than 1 decade in and out of California's toughest prisons for drug charges and armed robbery. what makes Danny Trejo different from a lot of other people is that he did not die at that bottom. He got sober in prison, came out in 1969, and has stayed clean from drugs and alcohol for more than 55 years. He worked as a counselor for addicts before he ever worked as an actor. In other words, he saved his own life first. Then Hollywood came later. Even after he became famous, that instinct to jump in and help other people never left. In 2019, he pulled over in traffic to help rescue a baby trapped inside an overturned car. Sure, he has still had late-life clashes like the fight at the July 4th parade in 2024 after somebody threw a water balloon at him. But if you look at the whole man, that is not what defines him. What defines Danny Trejo is that he lived hard enough that he should have disappeared a long time ago, and yet, in the end, he is still here as proof that some people can go very far into the dark and still drag themselves back. And that is a better way to close out the cast than any cameo ever could. So now you and I have made it all the way through the cast. But if you are still here, I have 5 really fun behind-the-scenes stories about Anchorman just for you, because this movie was not just crazy on screen, it was crazy from the minute they started making it. First of all, the cast improvised so heavily that at times they tried up to 20 different versions of the same line. That is why some parts of the movie feel like they are about to fly off the rails, and that is exactly why they are even funnier. Then there's one story I absolutely love. Tim Robbins once said he took his small role in Anchorman, even though he knew the pay was basically nothing, just because the crew promised they would make him a custom wig. And the best part is after filming, he kept that wig and later used it for Halloween. Another detail is really fun too. John C. Reilly was once invited to take a role in the movie but ended up turning it down because he was busy shooting The Aviator. Later on, he himself admitted he regretted that decision. It was not until much later that he finally showed up in Anchorman 2. And if you go back and watch the movie, you will notice this world is packed with way more stars than most of us remember. Seth Rogen, Jack Black, Ben Stiller, Danny Trejo, Tim Robbins, Luke Wilson, Judd Apatow, and even Adam McKay all show up somewhere in this movie. And of course, there is one thing you cannot leave out. The big street fight scene had 24 people in it. That number alone tells you how insane Anchorman really was. A movie that starts in a newsroom and somehow ends up turning into a ridiculous all-out brawl like that. Honestly, that is exactly the kind of madness only Anchorman could pull off. So now we have looked back at the cast of Anchorman after 22 years, and the thing I keep thinking is this: some movies do not just make you laugh for one night, they hold on to a whole stretch of your life. Anchorman is that kind of movie. It holds on to that reckless, swaggering thing that was so specific to American comedy. It holds on to faces that wake up your memory the second you see them. And it holds on to the feeling of a Hollywood era that still really knew how to create characters nobody could confuse with anybody else. Out of this cast, who surprised you the most? And do you still remember the first time you watched Anchorman? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to read those memories. Then do not forget to leave the name of the movie you want me to dig into next. And if you like these trips back in time, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next video.